I found out my father's will left everything to my younger brother 2 days before Dad died. The worst part? I was the one who had spent the last 3 years caring for him while my brother hadn't even bothered to call. But what happened next changed everything, and no one, especially not my brother, saw it coming. I still remember the exact moment when my life fell apart. It was a Tuesday evening in late October. The kind of autumn day where the air has just enough chill to remind you that winter is coming, but the sunlight still holds the warmth of summer memories. I was sitting beside my father's hospital bed, as I had done almost every day for the past 3 years since his Parkinson's diagnosis had progressed to the point where he needed constant care. My father, Richard Wells, had once been the life of every party. A successful real estate developer with a booming laugh that could fill a room, and a generosity that seemed limitless, at least to everyone outside the family. He built a small empire from nothing, turning a modest inheritance from his own father into a real estate company worth millions. Dad always preached that family comes first, but his actions told a different story. You see, my brother Jason was always the golden child. 7 years younger than me, he had that effortless charm that made people gravitate toward him. While I worked weekends at Dad's office filing paperwork and learning the business from the ground up, Jason was given freedom to explore his potential. While I put myself through college working part-time for the family business, Jason got a fully paid Ivy League education and a condo in downtown Boston, but I never resented it. That's what older siblings do, right? We pave the way. We understand. We sacrifice. And I truly believed that one day, it would all even out. Michael? My father's raspy voice pulled me from my thoughts that evening. His once powerful frame had withered, and his hand trembled as he reached for the water glass. I quickly held it to his lips, supporting his head as he took small sips. "I'm here, Dad," I said, setting the glass back down. "Do you need anything else?" He shook his head weakly and seemed to drift back to sleep. I returned to reviewing some paperwork for Wells Real Estate, the company I had been essentially running since his health declined. Taking care of Dad and managing the business had become my entire life. My marriage had ended partly because of it. Emily couldn't understand why I devoted every waking hour to a father who had always favored my brother. Sometimes, I didn't understand it myself, was about to step out to grab some coffee when Dr. Morris, Dad's physician, appeared in the doorway with a solemn expression that immediately sent my heart racing. "Michael, do you have a minute?" We stepped into the hallway, and he didn't waste time sugarcoating it. "Your father's condition has deteriorated more rapidly than we expected. His respiratory system is failing. I think it's time to call in any family who needs to say goodbye. I'd be surprised if he has more than a few days left." Though we'd known this was coming, the finality of it hit me like a physical blow. I nodded numbly, thanked him, and immediately called Jason. It went to voicemail, as it had done countless times before. I left a message anyway. "Jason, it's Mike. Dad doesn't have much time left. You need to come now if you want to say goodbye." Then I called Susan, Dad's lawyer and an old family friend. She'd been helping manage Dad's affairs since the diagnosis. "Susan, it's Michael. The doctor says Dad doesn't have much time left." There was a pause on the line. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, she said, her voice tight with what I assumed was emotion. When Susan arrived, she looked oddly uncomfortable. She embraced me briefly before asking if we could talk privately. We went to the small waiting room at the end of the hall, which was mercifully empty. "Michael," she began, setting her briefcase on the table between us. "There's something you need to know, and I've been struggling with how to tell you this." My stomach knotted with dread. "What is it?" "Your father made some changes to his will about 10 months ago." She pulled out a folder. I advised against it, but he was adamant. "Changes? What kind of changes?" The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. Susan took a deep breath. "He's leaving the entire company and most of his personal assets to Jason." The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. I must have misheard. What did you say? The house, the company shares, the investment portfolios, they're all going to Jason. You're to receive a small cash inheritance, $500,000, but nothing else. 500,000 might sound like a lot to some people, but compared to the roughly $40 million that constituted my father's estate, it was a pittance. More importantly, the company I had devoted my life to, that I had kept afloat while my father was sick and my brother was off finding himself, it would all go to Jason. This can't be right, I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. There must be some mistake. Susan looked genuinely pained. I'm so sorry, Michael. I tried to talk him out of it. I reminded him of everything you've done, how you've stepped up while Jason has been absent. But your father was insistent. Did he give a reason? I asked, struggling to keep my voice even. He said that Jason needed the security more than you do. That you were always the strong one, the capable one. That you would be fine no matter what. She paused. And he mentioned something about wanting to make sure his legacy continued in the way he envisioned. The implication was clear, Dad didn't trust me to run the company the way he wanted it run. Despite all the years I'd put in, all the sacrifices I'd made, he still believed Jason, who had never shown the slightest interest in real estate, would somehow be a better steward of his legacy. I sat there, numb, as Susan continued explaining the details. A small trust for my daughter Lily's education. Some personal items that Dad thought I might want. The rest, the bulk of everything he had built, everything I had helped him build, would go to my brother. When did he make these changes? I finally asked. Last January, Susan replied, looking uncomfortable again. After his hospitalization for pneumonia. I remembered that time all too well. I had been at the hospital day and night for 2 weeks straight. Jason had sent flowers and called once or twice, but never visited. Dad had seemed depressed afterward, more withdrawn, but I had attributed it to his declining health, not to some fundamental shift in how he viewed his sons. Does Jason know? I asked. Susan nodded slowly. Your father called him about it after signing the new will. The betrayal cut even deeper. Jason had known for months and never said a word. All those brief, awkward phone calls where he asked about Dad but never offered to help, he'd already known he was getting everything. I need some air, I said, standing abruptly. Susan reached out as if to stop me, but then thought better of it. I wandered outside into the hospital parking lot, the October chill cutting through my thin sweater. My phone buzzed, a text from Jason, on my way. Be there tomorrow morning. So now he decides to show up, I thought bitterly. Now that Dad is dying and the fortune is about to change hands, don't know how long I stood there, watching my breath form clouds in the cold air, before going back inside. When I returned to Dad's room, he was awake, looking frilier than ever. Michael, he whispered. Where's Jason? Of course. Even now, his first thought was of his younger son. He's coming tomorrow, I said, trying to keep the resentment from my voice. Dad nodded weakly, seemingly satisfied. Good. There are things I need to tell him. What about me, Dad? I couldn't help asking. Is there anything you need to tell me? He looked at me with rheumy eyes, and for a moment, I thought I saw regret there. You'll be fine, Michael. You always are. Those words, the same ones he had apparently used to justify cutting me out of his will, hit me like a physical blow. Being fine, being reliable and responsible, had become my curse. Stayed with him until he fell asleep again, then went home to my empty house. The one I'd bought 10 years ago with the money I'd earned working for Dad's company, the company that would soon belong to my brother. Barely slept that night. By morning, I had moved through shock and hurt to a cold, simmering anger. I arrived at the hospital early, wanting to be there before Jason showed up. Dad was worse. The night nurse told me he had struggled to breathe several times during the night. He was conscious but fading. I sat beside him, holding his trembling hand, trying to reconcile my anger with the love I still felt for this failing man. Around 10 a.m., I heard a familiar voice in the hallway. Jason. I steeled myself, uncertain how I would react when I saw him. He appeared in the doorway, looking exactly as I remembered, confident, well-dressed, handsome in that effortless way that had always opened doors for him. But there was something else in his expression now. Nervousness? Guilt? Mike, he said quietly, nodding to me before turning his attention to our father. Hey, Dad. Dad's eyes fluttered open, and his face transformed. Despite his weakness, he smiled, really smiled, at the sight of his younger son. Jason, he breathed. You came. Of course I came, Jason said, moving to the opposite side of the bed from where I sat. He took Dad's other hand. How are you feeling? I watched this reunion in silence, the anger inside me growing with each passing moment. Jason had been absent for years, showing up only for holidays and the occasional weekend visit that always seemed to end prematurely when something came up in his supposedly busy life as a startup consultant in Silicon Valley. Yet here he was, the prodigal son returned, about to inherit everything. Dad and Jason spoke quietly for a while. I caught fragments about Jason's latest business venture, some tech company he was advising. Dad seemed to hang on every word, more animated than I had seen him in weeks. It was as if Jason's presence alone had briefly reignited his fading spirit. Eventually, Dad fell asleep again, the conversation having drained what little energy he had left. Jason and I found ourselves alone in the room, the beeping of the monitors the only sound between us. We should talk, Jason said finally, nodding toward the door. Went to the same waiting room where Susan had delivered her bombshell the day before. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I studied my younger brother, noticing for the first time the lines around his eyes, the touches of gray at his temples. He wasn't a kid anymore. I guess Susan told you about the will, he said finally. Yesterday, I confirmed, my voice flat. Interesting timing. Jason had the grace to look uncomfortable. Mike, you've known for months, I cut him off. You knew, and you never said a word. While I was here every day, watching him deteriorate, running his company, putting my entire life on hold, you knew you were getting everything. It wasn't my idea, Jason said defensively. When Dad called to tell me, I was shocked. But not shocked enough to refuse, or even to pick up the phone and talk to me about it. Jason ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I remembered from our childhood. What was I supposed to say? Hey, Mike, guess what? Dad's giving me everything even though you're the one who's actually earned it. Would that have made anything better? It would have been honest, I said. It would have given me time to prepare, to make other plans. Plans for what? You're still getting $500,000. That's not nothing. I laughed bitterly. The company is worth nearly $40 million, Jason. The company I've been running single-handedly for 3 years while you've been off playing tech guru or whatever it is you actually do. And now it's all going to you, someone who wouldn't know a real estate deal if it hit you in the face. Jason's expression hardened. That's not fair. I've built my own career. I've made my own money. And good for you, I snapped. So why do you need Dad's company? Why not let it go to the person who's actually invested in it? Because Dad wanted me to have it. Jason shot back, his voice rising. He asked me to carry on his legacy. To build something that would last for generations. Our family name. His legacy, I repeated. The legacy I've been protecting while you've been absent. The legacy I've put my own life on hold for. I'm sorry it worked out this way, Jason said, his tone softening slightly. But this was Dad's decision, not mine. A decision you were happy enough to go along with. Before Jason could respond, a nurse appeared at the door. Mr. Wells? Your father is asking for both of you. We returned to Dad's room in tense silence. He was awake again but visibly weaker than before. His breathing was labored, and his skin had taken on a grayish cast. My boys, he said, his voice barely audible. Both my boys, here. Jason and I stood on either side of his bed again, a mirror image of our earlier positions. Dad's gaze moved between us, and for a moment, I thought I saw sadness there. I need to tell you both. He began, then stopped, struggling for breath. Don't strain yourself, Dad, I said automatically, reaching for the water glass. He waved it away weakly. No time, need to explain. Each word seemed to cost him tremendous effort. Explain what, Dad? Jason asked, leaning closer. Dad's eyes fixed on him. The company, your inheritance. My heart clenched painfully. Was he really going to use his last moments to remind us of how unequally he had divided his estate? I did it, for both of you, Dad continued, his voice fading. Jason and I exchanged confused glances. What do you mean, Dad? I asked, but before he could answer, his eyes rolled back, and the monitors began to wail. Medical staff rushed in, pushing us aside as they worked frantically to stabilize him. 20 minutes later, Richard Wells was pronounced dead, the days that followed passed in a blur. Funeral arrangements. Condolence calls. The endless paperwork that accompanies death. Jason and I moved through it all like actors in a play, performing the roles of grieving sons while barely speaking to each other. The reading of the will was scheduled for the Monday after the funeral, just 5 days after Dad's death. Susan's office was located in a historic building downtown, all dark wood paneling and leather chairs. It felt oppressively formal, like a courtroom where I was about to be sentenced. Jason arrived with a woman I didn't recognize, tall, elegant, with the poised confidence of old money. He introduced her as Vanessa, his fiancée. I hadn't even known he was engaged. That's how distant we had become. I was alone. My ex-wife Emily had sent flowers but declined to attend the funeral, and my teenage daughter Lily was away at boarding school. I hadn't asked her to come home for this particular meeting. There seemed no point in her watching her father be disinherited. Susan entered, looking somber in a black suit. She carried a thick folder and was followed by an older man I'd never seen before. Thank you both for coming, she began formally. This is Mr. Greaves, who will be witnessing the proceedings today. Mr. Greaves nodded but didn't speak. Susan opened the folder. I'll begin with the formal reading of the last will and testament of Richard James Wells, dated January 12, 2024. She started reading legal boilerplate, and I found my mind wandering. I already knew what was coming. The only question was whether I could maintain my composure when it was officially announced that my brother, who sat across from me now, holding his fiancée's manicured hand, would receive almost everything our father had built. I tuned back in as Susan reached the meat of the document. To my son, Michael Richard Wells, I leave the sum of $500,000 to be paid in a lump sum, free of tax. There it was. Just as she had warned me. I kept my face carefully blank, not wanting to give Jason the satisfaction of seeing my disappointment. Additionally, Susan continued, I leave to Michael my collection of rare books, my personal journals, and the contents of the safe located in my home office, the combination for which has been provided to my attorney. This was new. Dad had never mentioned a safe, nor had I seen one in his home office. I glanced at Susan, but her expression revealed nothing as she continued reading. To my son, Jason Thomas Wells, I leave the entirety of my shareholding in Wells Real Estate Holdings, amounting to 100% of the issued share capital, along with all associated assets, properties, and investments held by the company. I saw Jason squeeze Vanessa's hand, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. My jaw tightened involuntarily. Additionally, Susan read, I leave to Jason the family home at 47 Lakeview Drive and its contents, with the exception of those items specifically bequeathed to Michael, as well as my personal vehicles and the sum of $1 million to be paid in a lump sum, free of tax. So not only was Jason getting the company and all its assets, but also the house, the cars, and an additional $1 million in cash. The inequality of it was breathtaking. These bequests are made with full knowledge and consideration, Susan continued, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of what might have been disapproval. I have made these decisions not based on my love for my sons, which is equal and unwavering, but based on my assessment of their needs and capabilities. The familiar justification, the same one Susan had relayed to me in the hospital waiting room, felt even more insulting now, hearing it in Dad's own words. Because I was capable, I deserved less. Because Jason was less reliable, he deserved more. It was perverse logic. Finally, Susan said, I request that the attached letter be read aloud at the conclusion of this reading, in the presence of both my sons. She set aside the will and picked up a sealed envelope. Breaking it open, she pulled out several pages of what looked like handwritten text. This is in your father's handwriting, she confirmed, dated the same day as the will. She began to read, My dear sons, if you are hearing this, then I am gone, and you are both facing the consequences of decisions I have made that may seem unfair or even cruel. Before you judge me too harshly, I ask that you hear my explanation. Michael, my firstborn, from the day you arrived, you showed a strength and determination that amazed me. You learned to walk early, to read early, to take charge early. You were always the responsible one, the planner, the rock. When your mother died, though you were only 15, you stepped up in ways no child should have to. You became my confidant, my right hand, often more parent than child. Jason, my youngest, you came into our already formed family like a whirlwind. Curious, creative, always testing boundaries. Where Michael was steady, you were spontaneous. Where he was cautious, you took risks. You struggled after your mother's death, acting out in ways that worried me deeply. I fear that in my concern for you, I may have allowed you too much freedom, too little accountability. As you grew into men, these patterns continued. Michael, you joined the family business, learned every aspect of it, and eventually became its de facto leader when my health began to fail. Jason, you forged your own path, starting and abandoning various ventures, always searching for something that I fear you may never find. The decision I have made regarding my estate is not about love or merit. It is about what I believe each of you needs to grow into the men you are capable of becoming. Michael, you have already proven yourself capable of building and maintaining success. The money I leave you is seed capital for whatever you choose to create next. But more importantly, I leave you my journals and the contents of my safe. Inside, you will find documentation of every major decision I made in building Wells Real Estate, including mistakes that cost us dearly and opportunities we missed. Learn from them. They are worth far more than money. Jason, I leave you the company and the bulk of my estate not as a reward, but as a responsibility. A chance to prove, to yourself more than anyone, that you can commit to something larger than yourself. That you can be trusted with a legacy, but there is one condition that Susan has been instructed not to reveal until now. Susan paused here, looking up at both of us. Jason had gone very still, his earlier smile completely gone. I found myself leaning forward, suddenly alert. Susan continued reading. The ownership of Wells Real Estate Holdings will indeed pass to Jason upon my death. However, control of the company, the position of CEO and chairman, will be held by Michael for a period of 5 years. During this time, all major decisions regarding the company's direction, investments, and strategy must be approved by Michael. Jason will receive the profits and dividends as the owner, but Michael will guide the ship. After 5 years, if and only if Michael deems Jason ready to take control, ownership and control will be united under Jason. If, however, Michael determines that Jason is not prepared to lead the company responsibly, Michael will have the option to purchase the company from Jason at a fair market value determined by independent assessment. This arrangement may seem unusual or even manipulative. Perhaps it is. But it reflects my deep belief that both of you need something from the other. Michael, you need to learn to let go, to build something of your own rather than simply maintaining what I created. Jason, you need to learn commitment, responsibility, and the value of the legacy you have been given. Hope that in working together, something you have rarely done as adults, you might rebuild the bond you had as children. Before resentment and competition pulled you apart. Before I, in my flawed parenting, allowed that distance to grow, ask you both to honor this request, not for my sake, but for your own. And for the sake of the Wells name, which I hope will continue long after I am gone, with love to you both, your father, Richard James Wells. Susan finished reading and looked up. The room was completely silent. I stared at her, trying to process what I'd just heard. Jason looked equally stunned. Is this legal? Jason finally asked, his voice tight. Entirely, Susan confirmed. Your father set up a trust structure that makes this arrangement binding. The company shares transfer to you immediately, Jason, but the trust imposes these conditions on their management. So I own the company, but Mike runs it? Jason clarified, his expression darkening. For 5 years, Susan nodded. Or until you purchase his management rights, which is also possible under the terms of the trust. The details are quite complex, but essentially, you two are being forced to work together. I couldn't help it, I laughed. It was either that or cry. All the anger, all the resentment I had been harboring toward my father and brother suddenly seemed beside the point. Dad hadn't simply chosen Jason over me. He had created a situation where we were bound together, whether we liked it or not. This is ridiculous, Jason said, standing abruptly. I need to consult my own lawyer. You're welcome to do so, Susan replied calmly, but I assure you, the arrangement is legally sound. Your father went to great lengths to ensure it would be. I looked at Jason, really looked at him, for the first time in years. Behind the anger in his eyes, I saw something else. Fear. He had been counting on this inheritance, perhaps had already made plans based on it, and now he was discovering strings he hadn't anticipated. We should talk, I said, echoing his words from the hospital. Privately. Jason glanced at Vanessa, who gave a slight nod. Fine, he said. But not here. We agreed to meet at a nearby coffee shop. Susan provided us each with copies of the will and the letter, along with a detailed explanation of the trust structure. As I was leaving, she handed me a small envelope. The combination to your father's safe, she explained. And Michael, there's something else you should know. Your father asked me to tell you that what's in that safe is worth far more than the company. The coffee shop was busy, neutral territory filled with the ambient noise of normality. Jason and I found a corner table far from the other patrons. For a while, we just sat there, stirring drinks we barely tasted. Did you know about any of this? Jason finally asked. No, I said truthfully. I knew about the original distribution, that you were getting the company and almost everything else. But this arrangement, no. I had no idea. It's typical Dad, isn't it? Jason said with a bitter laugh. Controlling from beyond the grave. Despite everything, I found myself smiling slightly. He always did like to have the last word. So what do we do now? The question hung between us. What indeed? I had spent the last several days preparing myself to walk away from Wells Real Estate, to start over at 45. Now I was being told I would still be running it, but for my brother's benefit. It was nearly as insulting as being cut out entirely. We have options, I said slowly. We could fight it, spend a fortune on lawyers trying to break the trust. We could try to work with it, you as owner, me as CEO, figuring it out as we go. Or what? Jason prompted when I trailed off. Or we could do what Dad apparently wanted. Actually work together. Try to understand why he set things up this way. I paused. Before we decide anything, I need to see what's in that safe. Jason nodded slowly. Mind if I come along? Since we're supposedly in this together now. His tone was sarcastic, but there was something in his expression, a vulnerability, perhaps, that made me agree. We drove separately to Dad's house, soon to be Jason's house. It felt strange using my key knowing that I would soon have no right to enter freely. The house was quiet, still full of Dad's presence. His coffee mug still sat by his favorite chair. His reading glasses still perched on top of a half-finished novel, went to his office, a wood-paneled room that had always intimidated me as a child. Now it just seemed smaller than I remembered. The safe wasn't immediately visible, which was odd since I had spent plenty of time in this room over the years. It must be hidden, Jason suggested, running his hand along the bookshelf. Behind a book or a painting or something. We searched for nearly half an hour before finding it, concealed behind a false panel in the bottom of Dad's antique desk. It was small but sturdy, with a digital keypad. I entered the combination Susan had given me, and it clicked open. Inside was a stack of journals, decades worth, by the look of them, several USB drives, and a thick manila envelope with both our names written on it in Dad's distinctive handwriting. I lifted out the envelope first, opening it carefully. Inside was a manuscript of some kind, along with several folders of documents. The manuscript's title page read, "The Wells Legacy, the complete history of Wells Real Estate Holdings, the public story and the private truth." "What is it?" Jason asked, peering over my shoulder. "I think it's Dad's confession," I said slowly, leafing through the pages. "Look at this." The document detailed the founding of Wells Real Estate, but not the version I had always heard. According to these pages, Dad hadn't built the company from a small inheritance as family lore suggested. He had manipulated his way into controlling interest of his former employer's company during a financial crisis, essentially stealing it out from under the man who had given him his start in real estate. As we read further, more revelations emerged. Tax evasion schemes. Bribes to city officials for favorable zoning decisions. A deliberate campaign to drive down property values in certain neighborhoods so the company could buy up land cheaply. Shell companies used to hide assets during Dad's divorce from his first wife, a woman I had never even known existed. "Jesus," Jason whispered as we made our way through the document. "Did you know any of this?" I shook my head, feeling sick. "No. I knew Dad played hardball sometimes, but this is criminal in some cases." "And all these properties," Jason said, pointing to a list of addresses. "They're all still part of the company portfolio. The company I now own." The implication was clear. Jason hadn't just inherited a legitimate business, he had inherited legal liability for decades of questionable practices, spent hours going through the safe's contents. The journals provided even more damning details, chronicling Dad's ruthless business tactics and the emotional toll they had taken on him. One journal from the year after Mom died was particularly difficult to read, as Dad described using work as an escape from grief, making increasingly aggressive and risky moves to avoid dealing with his emotions. The USB drives contained digital evidence, scanned documents, recorded conversations, spreadsheets tracking payments that had never appeared in the official company books. By the time we finished, night had fallen. We sat in Dad's office, surrounded by the wreckage of the image we had held of him. "He was setting me up," Jason said finally, his voice hollow. "Giving me ownership of a company built on fraud. If any of this ever came to light, not just you," I pointed out. "I've been running the company for the last 3 years. I signed off on decisions without knowing what came before." We were both silent for a long moment, processing the implications. "There's one more thing," I said, pulling out a final envelope that had been at the bottom of the safe. It was addressed to both of us, with "Open Last" written in large letters across the front. Inside was a letter, shorter than the one Susan had read at the will reading. "Michael and Jason, by now you've seen the truth about how Wells Real Estate was built. Every shortcut, every scheme, every line I crossed. The company you've inherited is successful, but its foundation is rotten. This is your test. Both of you. Not just whether you can work together, but whether you can do what I never had the courage to do, build something honest. Clean up the mess I've made. Make the Wells name stand for something better than clever fraud. Michael, you have the knowledge and the operational skill to guide the company through this transition. Jason, you have the vision and innovative thinking to reimagine what the company could become. Together, you might succeed where I failed. Apart, you will almost certainly fail, and decades of deception may come to light with consequences I cannot predict. The choice is yours. But know this, the 5-year arrangement I've created isn't just about teaching Jason responsibility or giving Michael his due. It's about giving you both the time and structure you need to either transform this company or dismantle it safely. I'm sorry for the burden I have placed on you both. More than that, I am sorry for being a father who taught you to compete rather than cooperate. Who played favorites and created divisions instead of unity. Whatever you decide, know that I loved you both, even if I showed it poorly. Dad, I finished reading and looked up at Jason. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. So that's it, he said flatly. The great inheritance. A company built on fraud and a mess to clean up. Pretty much, I agreed. What do we do now? It was the second time he had asked me that question today, but this time it carried the weight of our shared discovery. I don't know, I admitted. But I think we need to figure it out together. Jason nodded slowly. Together. The word hung between us, a possibility neither of us had considered before today. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I looked at my brother not as a rival or as the favored son, but as a partner in a challenge neither of us had anticipated. I could use some air, Jason said, standing. Want to walk? We left Dad's house and walked in silence through the neighborhood, past houses where nothing had changed while everything in our world had been upended. After a while, Jason spoke. You know, when Dad called to tell me about the will, that I was getting the company and everything else, I was in the middle of a crisis with my own business. The startup I'd been advising had just collapsed, taking most of my investment with it. Vanessa's family was pressuring us about wedding plans I couldn't afford. I was about to have to admit to everyone that I'd failed. Again. He paused, looking up at the night sky. When Dad told me what he was planning, it felt like a lifeline. Suddenly, all my problems were solved. I wouldn't have to admit failure. I could step into a ready-made success story. Is that why you never visited? I asked. You were ashamed? Jason nodded. Partly. And partly because I couldn't face you. You were always the successful one, the one who had Dad's respect. I was just the screw-up who would eventually inherit everything despite not deserving it. That's not how I saw it, I said quietly. I always thought Dad respected you more. You were free to pursue your dreams while I was stuck in the role he chose for me. Jason laughed bitterly. Looks like we were both wrong about a lot of things. We walked a bit further before I spoke again. For what it's worth, I think Dad was right about one thing. We do need each other to fix this mess. How do we even start? Jason asked. The scope of what we're dealing with, it's overwhelming. One step at a time, I said. First, we need legal advice, someone independent, not Susan. We need to understand exactly what liabilities we're facing. Then we need a strategy, Jason added. A way to clean up the company without destroying it completely. It won't be easy, I warned. Some of these practices are deeply embedded in how the company operates. Changing them will affect profitability, at least in the short term. Maybe that's okay, Jason said thoughtfully. Maybe a slightly less profitable but ethically sound company is better than what we have now. We had reached a small park and sat on a bench, continuing to talk into the night. For the first time in years, I felt like I was actually seeing my brother, not the golden child of my resentment, but a complex human being with his own struggles and insecurities. As we walked back to Dad's house under the quiet stars, an unspoken understanding had formed between us. Years of resentment were beginning to crack, revealing something unexpected beneath. You know, I said, breaking the silence, I always thought that running Wells Real Estate was my destiny. Now I'm not so sure I even want it. Jason looked at me with surprise. What would you do instead? I shrugged. I've been thinking about starting my own development company. Something smaller, more focused on sustainable building practices. I've had ideas brewing for years but never had the courage to leave Dad's shadow. That sounds actually pretty great, Jason admitted. We reached Dad's house, soon to be Jason's, and stood awkwardly in the driveway. Stay for one more drink? Jason offered. We've got a lot more to figure out. Inside, we poured 2 glasses of Dad's expensive scotch and settled into the living room. The house felt different now, as if Dad's final revelations had changed the very air within its walls. So here's what I'm thinking, Jason said, leaning forward. What if we use the 5-year arrangement to our advantage? You guide the company through the cleanup process while I learn the business from the ground up, the right way. Then we can decide together what happens next. You'd be willing to start at the bottom? I asked skeptically. Not the very bottom, Jason grinned, but close enough. I need to understand this business if I'm going to own it responsibly. And I need your help. I considered his proposal. We'll need outside help, forensic accountants, lawyers we can trust. This won't be quick or easy. I know. But think about it, we could actually rebuild the company into something we're proud of. Something clean. As we talked into the night, a plan began to take shape. We would quietly address the legal vulnerabilities one by one, making restitution where necessary. We would phase out the questionable practices that had become standard operating procedure. And most importantly, we would do it together, combining my operational knowledge with Jason's fresh perspective over the next 5 years, Wells Real Estate transformed. The process wasn't always smooth, there were heated arguments, setbacks, and moments when we both questioned whether it was worth the effort. But gradually, we built something better than what Dad had left us. I taught Jason the business, and he brought in new ideas that modernized our approach. The company became smaller initially as we divested from properties with questionable acquisitions, but eventually grew stronger with transparent practices and innovative projects. Jason's fiancée Vanessa proved to be an unexpected ally, her background in corporate law helping us navigate the complicated cleanup process. My daughter Lily, initially skeptical of my renewed relationship with her uncle, eventually joined the company during summer breaks from college, bringing her own perspective to our family business. When the 5-year mark approached, Jason and I met at the same coffee shop where we had first discussed Dad's strange inheritance arrangement. So, Jason said, the 5 years are almost up. Have I proven myself worthy of running the company? I smiled. That's not really the question anymore, is it? No, he agreed. I guess it's not. What we had built was no longer simply Dad's company that one of us would control. It was our company, a true partnership that had emerged from Dad's manipulative bequest. In the end, we restructured the ownership. Jason retained majority shares, but I kept a significant stake and we established a formal board with both of us serving as co-chairs. The Wells name now represented something we had created together, not the tainted legacy Dad had left us. On the anniversary of Dad's death, 5 years after that fateful will reading, Jason and I visited his grave together. We stood side by side, 2 brothers who had found their way back to each other through the most unlikely of circumstances. Do you think this is what he intended all along? Jason asked, staring at the headstone. For us to actually become brothers again? I don't know, I said honestly. Dad was manipulative until the end. But maybe he did understand something about us that we didn't see ourselves. That we're stronger together than apart? Something like that. As we walked away from the cemetery, I realized that Dad's final gift hadn't been the company or the money. It had been the chance to rediscover my brother, to build a relationship based on mutual respect rather than competition. It had been the opportunity to create something honest out of something flawed. The silent inheritance, it turned out, was the wisdom to see beyond the material legacy to the human one, the understanding that family, when it works as it should, gives us the strength to face our greatest challenges. Jason clapped me on the shoulder. Ready for that board meeting tomorrow? I hear my co-chair can be a real hard ass. Only when necessary, I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. Together, we walked toward the future, not the one Dad had mapped out for us, but one we had chosen for ourselves. I always had my doubts. We should do a DNA test. I must have replayed those words 1,000 times in my head since that Tuesday evening. They hung in the air of our kitchen like an uninvited guest that refuses to leave. Mark had said it so calmly, almost as an afterthought while loading the dishwasher. As if he'd merely suggested trying a new restaurant or switching cable providers. 15 years. 15 years of marriage, family photos on the mantle, homework help, and late-night fevers. 15 years of watching our son Jacob grow from a squirming pink bundle to a lanky teenager with his father's jawline and my stubbornness. Or so I thought. What are you talking about? I laughed nervously, certain he was joking. Mark wasn't the joking type, but this had to be an exception. DNA test for what? He closed the dishwasher and pressed start before meeting my eyes. His expression remained unchanged, methodical, determined, the same look he wore when reviewing quarterly reports for his accounting firm. For Jacob, he said simply. I want to know for sure. The wooden spoon I'd been using to stir spaghetti sauce slipped from my fingers, splattering red across the pristine white tile floor. It looked like a crime scene. In many ways, it was about to become one. My name is Emily Parker. 6 weeks ago, I was a 38-year-old physical therapist with a comfortable suburban life in Columbus, Ohio. I had a successful private practice, a dependable husband of 15 years, and a bright, compassionate son who just started high school. We had a 4-bedroom colonial with a finished basement, 2 cars in the garage, and a golden retriever named Cooper. The American dream, neatly packaged and tied with a bow. Our life ran like clockwork, a well-oiled machine of routine and predictability. Mark left for work at 7:30 a.m. sharp. Jacob caught the school bus at 7:45. I saw my first patient at 9 o'clock. We had family dinner at 6:30 most nights. On Fridays, we ordered pizza and watched movies. Saturdays were for Jacob's soccer games and household chores. Sundays meant brunch after church, followed by meal prep for the week ahead. We weren't unhappy. At least, I didn't think we were. But maybe that was the problem, we weren't anything. We existed in a comfortable numbness that I mistook for stability. I should have known better. In physical therapy, when a patient says they feel nothing, it's often worse than when they're screaming in pain. Numbness means the nerve damage runs deep. I'm sorry, you want to do what? I asked again, certain I had misheard him. Mark sighed and leaned against the counter. I want to get a DNA test for Jacob. Why on earth would you want to do that? He's your son. My voice rose sharply, panic edging in. Is he? Mark asked quietly. Because I've always had this feeling, Emily. Something that never quite added up. I felt my face flush hot with anger. 15 years. You wait 15 years to bring this up? To accuse me of, what exactly? Cheating on you? Getting pregnant with someone else's child and passing him off as yours? I'm not accusing you of anything, he said in that infuriatingly calm voice he used when I was upset. I just want to know the truth. The truth? The truth is that you were there in the delivery room when Jacob was born. You cut the umbilical cord, for God's sake. I know, and that's why this doesn't make sense to me either. But I can't shake this feeling. He paused, running a hand through his graying hair. Look, I've been talking to Dr. Phillips about this. I froze. Dr. Phillips was Mark's therapist. He'd started seeing her about 6 months ago for what he called midlife adjustments. I had been proud of him for taking his mental health seriously, something rare for men his age. You've been discussing doubts about your son with your therapist instead of your wife? The betrayal stung worse than the accusation. She suggested that knowing for certain might help me move past these feelings. That uncertainty can be more damaging than difficult truths. I wanted to scream. To throw something. Instead, I carefully wiped the sauce from the floor, buying time as I tried to process what was happening. Mark, I have never been unfaithful to you. Not once in almost 16 years of marriage. Jacob is your son. Then you won't mind doing the test, he said, as if it were the most reasonable request in the world. It's just a cheek swab. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize, and we can move forward knowing for sure. I stood up, tossing the soiled paper towels into the trash with more force than necessary. And if you're right? What then? He didn't answer. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Next to me lay a man who had just shattered the foundation of our marriage with a single sentence. I stared at the ceiling, replaying our relationship in my mind, searching for cracks I might have missed. Met in college, Mark was a senior accounting major when I was a sophomore studying physical therapy. He wasn't the type to sweep a girl off her feet with grand romantic gestures, but he was steady, reliable. He remembered birthdays and anniversaries. He showed up when he said he would. After my tumultuous childhood with an alcoholic father who disappeared for days at a time, Mark's consistency felt like a life raft. Married 3 years later, right after I finished my degree. Waited 2 years to start trying for a baby, just like we'd planned. Jacob came along in our 5th year of marriage. The pregnancy had been textbook perfect. The delivery, while long, had no complications. He was born at Ohio Regional Medical Center on April 17, 2009, at 3:47 a.m., weighing 7 pounds, 8 ounces. Mark had been there through it all: the morning sickness, the midnight ice cream runs, the Lamaze classes. He'd held my hand through 22 hours of labor and cried when they placed Jacob on my chest. How could he possibly doubt that this was his child? The next morning, over coffee, I tried a different approach. What exactly makes you think Jacob isn't yours? I asked, keeping my voice level. Mark hesitated, stirring his coffee though he took it black. It's a lot of little things. The way he looks. His personality. His interests. He has your chin, your height. Everyone says he has your walk. But he has neither of our eye colors. Or hair texture. His artistic abilities certainly don't come from either of us. I rolled my eyes. That's called genetics, Mark. Recessive genes, mutations. My grandfather had blue eyes. Your mother was artistic before her accounting career. It's more than that, he insisted. I've never felt the connection I thought I would. From the beginning, something felt off. The confession knocked the wind out of me. For 15 years, my husband had been looking at our son and feeling disconnected. Searching his face for resemblances and coming up empty. How had I missed this? Why didn't you ever say anything? I whispered. What was I supposed to say? Hey, I don't feel like this kid is mine even though I have no reason to suspect you've been unfaithful. I thought I was just broken somehow. That I wasn't cut out for fatherhood. Despite my anger, my heart broke for him. For us. For Jacob, who had no idea his father had spent his entire life questioning their bond. Fine, I said finally. We'll do the test. But Jacob doesn't find out about this. And afterward, you're going to get more intensive therapy to figure out why you've spent 15 years emotionally detached from your son. Mark nodded, looking relieved. Thank you. I've already ordered the kits online. They should arrive tomorrow. Of course he had. Always efficient, my husband. The test kits arrived in a plain cardboard box. Inside were 3 sealed packages, each containing a plastic tube with a cotton swab. The instructions were simple: rub the swab on the inside of your cheek for 30 seconds, place it in the tube, seal, and mail back in the prepaid envelope. Why are there 3? I asked, examining the packages. 1 for each of us, Mark replied. You, me, and Jacob. You're testing me too? I couldn't hide my shock. It's standard procedure. They need to confirm maternal DNA to properly analyze the paternal connection. It made sense from a scientific standpoint, but it still felt like another accusation. I was tempted to refuse, but that would only feed into whatever paranoia had gripped my husband. The hardest part was swabbing Jacob without raising suspicions. We waited until he was engrossed in a video game, then Mark casually approached him. Hey buddy, I'm participating in a genetics study through work. They need family samples. Mind helping out? Jacob barely looked up from his game. Whatever, Dad, he mumbled, opening his mouth for the swab without question. The casual trust between them made me want to cry. Jacob had no idea his father was testing the very foundation of their relationship. The ease with which Mark lied to our son made me wonder what else he might have hidden over the years. Mailed the samples that afternoon. The company promised results within 5 to 7 business days. A week to determine whether my marriage had been built on truth or lies. A week that stretched before me like an eternity. The waiting was excruciating. Mark acted as if everything was normal, going about his routine with the same methodical precision he always had. I, on the other hand, felt like I was coming apart at the seams. Every interaction with Jacob became charged with new significance. Did he really have Mark's chin, or had I just convinced myself of that over the years? Was his artistic talent truly an anomaly in our family of numbers people? The more I looked, the more uncertain I became. I found myself staring at old baby photos, trying to objectively assess who he resembled more. On Thursday night, 3 days after mailing the samples, I found myself sitting in the parking lot of Ohio Regional Medical Center. I hadn't planned to come here. I'd told Mark I was meeting a friend for dinner, but something pulled me toward the place where Jacob was born. The hospital had been renovated several times since 2009. The maternity ward had moved to a new wing, and the lobby had been modernized with sleek furniture and digital directories. Still, the sterile smell and fluorescent lighting brought back memories of that April morning, the exhaustion, the pain, the indescribable joy when they placed my son in my arms. "Can I help you?" A security guard approached, eyeing me suspiciously as I stood staring at the building. "No, I'm fine," I said quickly. "Just reminiscing. My son was born here." His face softened. "Congratulations. How old?" 15, I replied, the number catching in my throat. He chuckled. "They grow up fast. Have a good night, ma'am." I nodded and returned to my car, unsure why I'd come. What did I expect to find? Some clue that would explain my husband's sudden crisis of paternity? Reassurance that no mistakes had been made the day Jacob was born. I started the engine but couldn't bring myself to leave. Instead, I pulled out my phone and searched hospital baby switch statistics. The results were simultaneously comforting and terrifying. The chances of babies being switched at birth in U.S. hospitals were incredibly low. Some estimates put it at 1 in 8 million. Modern security protocols made such mistakes nearly impossible, but nearly impossible wasn't the same as impossible. And hospitals in 2009 didn't have all the security measures that were standard today. RFID tracking. Digital footprints. Matching ID bands with barcodes. I scrolled through article after article, reading about historical cases. Most switches were discovered when the children were still infants, through blood type incompatibilities or observant nurses catching mistakes. The cases discovered years later often came to light through DNA testing for medical reasons or, increasingly, through ancestry websites. By the time I drove home, my mind was racing with possibilities I'd never considered. What if Mark's instincts were right, but not in the way he thought? What if the issue wasn't infidelity but something much more complicated? I didn't share these thoughts with Mark. Part of me was still furious that he'd questioned my fidelity. Another part feared giving credence to his doubts. So I kept quiet and waited for the results that would either repair or destroy our family. The email arrived 6 days after we'd mailed the samples. I was at work when my phone chimed with the notification, "Your DNA test results are ready." My hands trembled so badly I couldn't tap the link. I excused myself from the clinic, telling my receptionist I needed to handle a family matter, and locked myself in my office. Taking a deep breath, I opened the email and logged into the testing company's portal. The results loaded slowly, each pixel revealing a truth I wasn't prepared to face. When the page finally displayed, I had to read it 3 times before the information sank in. Maternal DNA match, 99.9999% positive paternal DNA match, 0% positive. The world tilted on its axis. I gripped the edge of my desk to steady myself, certain I must be misreading the results. But the numbers didn't change. The science was clear, Jacob was definitely my son. He was definitely not Mark's, but that was impossible. I had never been with anyone else. Never, I called Mark with shaking hands. Did you see? I asked when he answered. Yes. His voice was flat, emotionless. I think we need to talk in person. Mark, I swear to you, not over the phone, he interrupted. I'll be home by 6. He hung up before I could respond. I sat in stunned silence, staring at the results on my screen. How could science tell me that my son had no genetic connection to my husband when I knew with absolute certainty that I had been faithful? It defied logic. It defied reality itself, unless a cold realization washed over me. There was one possibility I hadn't considered, one explanation that would make these results make sense. My hand flew to my mouth as the truth crystallized in my mind, canceled my remaining appointments and drove straight back to Ohio Regional Medical Center. I'm sorry, but we can't release medical records without proper authorization, the hospital administrator explained for the third time. Even if they're your own records, we have protocols. I understand that, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But this is an emergency. I need to know if there were any other baby boys born around the same time as my son on April 17, 2009. The woman, her nameplate read Patricia Geller, patient records, gave me a sympathetic but firm look. That would be protected information even if I could access it easily, which I can't. Our records from that period aren't fully digitized. Please, I begged, leaning across her desk. My husband just got a DNA test showing he's not our son's father, but I have never been unfaithful. I need to know if there could have been a mix-up. Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed quickly by alarm. Oh my goodness. That's a serious allegation. I'm not looking to sue or cause trouble, I assured her. I just need to know the truth. She glanced around the office, then lowered her voice. I can't help you officially. But as a mother myself, I understand your distress. She slid a business card across the desk. This is Dr. Eleanor Winters. She was the head of obstetrics back then. Retired now, but still consults occasionally. If anyone would remember or have access to information, it would be her. I clutched the card like a lifeline. Thank you. Thank you so much. I didn't give you this, she said firmly. And Mrs. Parker? Good luck. Dr. Winters agreed to meet me the next day at a coffee shop near her home. She was in her late 60s, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and keen eyes that missed nothing. She listened without interruption as I explained the situation. April 17, 2009, she repeated when I finished. That was during my tenure, yes. There was a storm that night. Power fluctuations. She frowned, trying to remember. We had backup generators, of course, but it was chaotic. My heart raced. Were there other baby boys born that night? Almost certainly, she nodded. We delivered between 10 and 15 babies daily back then. But without access to records, I couldn't tell you specifically. Is it possible, I forced myself to ask, that babies could have been switched? Accidentally? Dr. Winters didn't dismiss the question outright, which terrified me more than anything. Our protocols were designed to prevent such mistakes. ID bans, constant supervision. But human error can occur in any system, especially during disruptions like power outages. So it's possible, I whispered. Possible but unlikely, she clarified. Listen, Mrs. Parker, before you go down this road, you should consider other explanations. Genetic anomalies. Lab errors in the DNA testing. I've considered everything, I said. Nothing else makes sense. I know I gave birth to my son. I know I never cheated on my husband. The only explanation is that the baby I gave birth to isn't the baby I took home. She studied me with clinical detachment. If, and this is a significant if, there was a switch, what do you hope to accomplish by uncovering it? Your son is 15. The bonds you've formed aren't dependent on genetics. I need the truth, I said simply. For all of us. Dr. Winters sighed heavily. I can't officially help you access records. But I still have colleagues at the hospital. I can make some discreet inquiries about births on that date. No promises. That's all I ask, I said gratefully. As she stood to leave, she placed a hand on my shoulder. Be careful what you wish for, Mrs. Parker. Some truths change everything. Mark's reaction to my hospital theory was unexpected. I thought he'd be relieved that there might be an explanation that didn't involve infidelity. Instead, he seemed almost disappointed. A baby switch? That's what you're going with? He shook his head, pacing our living room. Do you know how rare that is? More common than immaculate conception, I shot back. Which is what you're suggesting happened if you think I cheated, but Jacob is still genetically mine. I'm just saying it seems convenient. A hospital error that nobody noticed for 15 years. Convenient? I was incredulous. You think I find it convenient that our son might not be the child I gave birth to? That somewhere out there could be my biological son being raised by strangers? That stopped him. The implication hung heavy between us. If Jacob wasn't genetically Mark's son, but was mine, and I had never been unfaithful, then our biological child might be out there somewhere. I'm sorry, he said finally. This is just a lot to process. For both of us, I agreed, softening slightly. Look, Dr. Winters is checking birth records. If there were other baby boys born that night, we can pursue DNA testing. If not, we'll have to consider other explanations. And Jacob? When do we tell him? Not until we know something for certain, I said firmly. There's no need to turn his world upside down based on theories. Mark nodded slowly. Okay. But Emily, if this is true, if there was a switch, it doesn't just affect us. There's another family out there who might have our biological son. The thought had been haunting me since the DNA results arrived. Another couple raising my flesh and blood, while I raised theirs. Had they noticed discrepancies too? Had they questioned connections, resemblances, inherited traits? Or had they simply embraced their child without the doubts that had plagued Mark? One step at a time, I said, more to myself than to him. First, we find out if it's even possible. Dr. Winters called 3 days later. There were 4 baby boys born at Ohio Regional between midnight and 6 a.m. on April 17, 2009, she said without preamble. Including your son. My heart stuttered. 4? Yes. I can't give you names or medical details, but I can tell you that all 4 were healthy, full-term deliveries. Were they all in the nursery at the same time? Most likely. Our practice then was to return babies to the nursery during mother's rest periods. During the storm and power fluctuations, I prompted, she sighed. Yes. Look, I've gone further than I should professionally. But as someone who dedicated her life to bringing babies safely into this world, I understand your need for answers. The hospital keeps birth announcements from the local paper in their archives. Public information. April 18th and 19th, 2009 editions would have announcements for births on the 17th. It wasn't much, but it was a lead. Thank you, Dr. Winters. Truly. Mrs. Parker, she said before hanging up. Whatever you discover, remember that parenthood is about more than genetics. The child you raised is yours in all the ways that matter most. I wanted to believe her. But as I hung up, I couldn't help wondering if somewhere, in one of those other 3 families, my biological son was growing up without me. The local public library kept digital archives of the Columbus Dispatch. I found the birth announcements quickly. Jacob Thomas Parker, born April 17 to Mark and Emily Parker. Aiden James Wilson, born April 17 to Robert and Jennifer Wilson. Lucas Michael Rodriguez, born April 17 to Miguel and Sofia Rodriguez. Ethan David Chin, born April 17 to Daniel and Machen. 4 baby boys. 4 families. 4 lives that might be intertwined in ways none of us had imagined. Stared at the names until they blurred together. One of these children might be my biological son. One of these families might be raising the baby I delivered. And one of these couples might have a genetic claim to Jacob. Finding them wouldn't be difficult in the age of social media. But approaching them would be another matter entirely. How do you tell strangers that the child they've raised for 15 years might not be theirs? How do you suggest a DNA test without sounding like a lunatic? I started with basic searches. The Wilsons were easiest to find. Robert Wilson was a dentist with his own practice, and Jennifer was active on multiple social media platforms. Their son Aiden was on the high school swim team, his achievements regularly featured in local sports pages. The Rodriguez family had moved to Cincinnati shortly after Lucas's birth, according to a moving announcement I found in an old community newsletter. Miguel was an engineer, Sophia a third-grade teacher. The Chens were more difficult. Daniel was a common name, and initial searches yielded too many results to narrow down. But a deeper dive revealed that Daniel Chen had been a resident physician at Ohio Regional in 2009, which explained why they delivered there. He was now an oncologist at Cleveland Clinic. I created a spreadsheet with all the information I could gather publicly. Names, occupations, current locations, children's activities. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, some smoking gun that would indicate which family might have our biological child. Photos that showed a boy who looked exactly like Mark. Reality wasn't that convenient. All 4 boys were now teenagers with distinct appearances shaped by puberty, personal style, and the vagaries of adolescent development. None looked definitively like either Mark or me, at least not from the limited photos I could find online. I was at an impasse. Without DNA testing, I couldn't prove anything. But I couldn't ask these families for DNA samples without explanation, and I couldn't explain my suspicions without sounding delusional. When I remembered something, Jacob had been tested for genetic predisposition to certain conditions when he was 10, after my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. The test had shown no concerning genetic markers, which had been a relief at the time. But now I wondered if those results held new significance. I called my mother that evening. "Mom, do you remember Jacob's genetic screening after your diagnosis? Did they happen to test for BRCA mutations?" "Of course," she replied. "That was the main reason we did it." "Why?" "And the results were negative, right?" "Thank goodness, yes. The genetic counselor said he doesn't carry the family mutation. Lucky boy got his father's genes there. Except he didn't have his father's genes at all, according to our recent test. If the hospital's genetic screening was accurate, Jacob didn't have my family's BRCA mutation either. Which meant he likely wasn't genetically related to either of us. The ground shifted beneath me once again. If Jacob wasn't genetically connected to either Mark or me, then we weren't dealing with a simple 2-family switch. This was potentially more complex and more devastating than I'd imagined. Mark's reaction to my research was surprisingly pragmatic. "If we're going to do this, we need legal advice," he said after reviewing my findings. "This isn't just about DNA. It's about parental rights, medical histories, potential lawsuits against the hospital." "I'm not interested in suing anyone," I clarified. "I just want the truth." "The truth could have massive legal implications," he countered. "If Jacob isn't biologically ours, and our biological child is out there, we need to understand our options." I hadn't allowed myself to think that far ahead. Would knowing the truth change how we felt about Jacob? Would we want custody of our biological child, even though they were a stranger to us? Would the other families feel the same? "One step at a time," I said, echoing my earlier mantra. "First, we need to confirm if there was actually a mix-up." Mark nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "How do we do that without involving the other families yet?" "I've been thinking about that. What if we used one of those ancestry websites? If our biological child or their parents have ever submitted DNA, there might be matches." "That's actually a good idea," Mark admitted. much less invasive than approaching strangers. The next day, we both submitted samples to AncestryLink, the largest DNA database in the country. Unlike the paternity test, these results would take weeks, not days. More waiting, more uncertainty. But at least it was a path forward. In the meantime, I couldn't stop watching Jacob, searching for clues in his features, his mannerisms, his personality. He was in many ways the perfect blend of Mark and me, organized but creative, analytical but empathetic. Or had we simply raised him to embody those qualities? Nature versus nurture playing out in our living room. One evening, as Jacob worked on a detailed drawing of our backyard landscape, I found myself wondering which of the other families might have produced such an artistic child. The Wilsons, with their athletic son? The Rodriguez family, who posted photos of science fair projects? The Chens, whose social media suggested a musically inclined teenager? "What are you staring at, Mom?" Jacob asked suddenly, looking up from his sketchpad. "Just admiring your work," I said quickly. Your comment stung, not because it was untrue. Mark had always emphasized practical skills over creative pursuits, but because it highlighted the disconnect that had apparently always existed between them. Had Mark's unconscious awareness of their lack of biological connection influenced his attitude toward Jacob's interests? "Your dad wants what's best for you," I said carefully. "But that doesn't mean he's always right." Jacob shrugged. "It's fine. I'm used to it." But it wasn't fine. And I wasn't sure any of us would ever get used to the truth, whatever it turned out to be. The AncestryLink results came back 3 weeks later. I was alone when I opened the email, Mark having left for a weekend conference in Chicago. With trembling fingers, I clicked through to my results. The ethnicity breakdown matched what I expected based on my family history, primarily European with some Native American ancestry. But it was the DNA matches section that made my breath catch. At the top of the list, labeled Close Family First Degree, was a name I didn't recognize, Connor Mitchell. The site explained that first-degree relatives share approximately 50% of their DNA, parents, children, full siblings. This Connor Mitchell, whoever he was, shared 49.7% of my genetic makeup. My child. My son. I clicked on his profile with shaking hands. There wasn't much information, just a basic profile created a year earlier. No photos, no family tree, just a username, CMitch 2024. I immediately sent a message through the site's system. "Hello Connor, my name is Emily Parker. According to AncestryLink, we appear to be closely related, likely parent and child. I believe there may have been a mix-up at Ohio Regional Medical Center in April 2009. If you or your parents are open to discussing this, please contact me. This is extremely important." Then I waited, constantly refreshing the page, hoping for a response that didn't come. Hours passed, and the initial shock gave way to a nauseating mixture of anticipation and dread. I had potentially found my biological son, but I had no way of knowing which family he belonged to, or if they were even aware of the situation. When Mark called that evening to check in, I told him everything. "Connor Mitchell," he repeated. "That name wasn't on your list of the 4 families." "No," I confirmed. "Either his parents changed his name from the birth announcement, or there are more than 4 families involved," Mark finished grimly. "Have you checked my results yet?" I hadn't even thought to look. Logging into his account, I navigated to the DNA matches section. There, at the top of his list, was another unfamiliar name, Ethan Chin, the same Ethan Chin born on April 17, 2009. The same Ethan Chen whose parents had delivered at Ohio Regional during the storm. According to AncestryLink, he shared 49.8% of Mark's DNA. "Mark," I whispered into the phone. "I think I found our son." The puzzle pieces were starting to connect, but the picture they formed was more complex than we had imagined. Mark and I had apparently both found our biological children through AncestryLink, but they weren't the same child. Our biological son was being raised by the Chin family, while my biological son was someone named Connor Mitchell, a name that hadn't appeared in the birth announcements, and Jacob, our Jacob, was genetically related to neither of us. According to both the paternity test and the absence of my family's BRCA mutation in his genetic screening, what had happened in that hospital 15 years ago? 2 days passed with no response from Connor's profile. Mark returned from his conference, and we tried to piece together the possibilities. If Ethan Chin is my biological son, Mark reasoned, and Connor Mitchell is yours, then Jacob must be biologically related to a third set of parents, I finished. But which ones? The Wilsons? The Rodriguez family? Or someone else entirely? And who are the Mitchells? Why weren't they on your list? I had no answers. But the next day, I received a notification from Ancestry Link. You have a new message. Mrs. Parker, this is David Mitchell, Connor's father. Your message was forwarded to me as he is a minor. What exactly are you suggesting about my son? Please explain yourself fully before we consider any further communication. The tone was defensive, even hostile. But at least it was a response. I crafted a careful reply. Mr. Mitchell, thank you for responding. This is difficult to explain via message, but I'll try to be clear. My husband and I recently discovered through DNA testing that our 15-year-old son, Jacob, is not biologically related to either of us. He was born at Ohio Regional on April 17, 2009. The Ancestry Link test shows that Connor shares my DNA at a parent-child level. I believe there may have been a mix-up at the hospital involving multiple babies. I'm not looking to disrupt your family, I just want to understand what happened. If you're open to a conversation, I would greatly appreciate it. His response came faster this time. This is impossible. Connor was not born at Ohio Regional. He was born at home with a midwife on April 15, 2009. Your test must be wrong. April 15, not 17th. And a home birth, not hospital. This contradicted everything I thought I knew. If Connor wasn't born at Ohio Regional, how could he be my biological son? And if he was born 2 days earlier, how could there have been a switch, unless a terrible suspicion began to form? I sent another message. Mr. Mitchell, I understand your skepticism. This is confusing for all of us. May I ask, was Connor ever taken to Ohio Regional after his birth? Perhaps for a checkup or due to complications. Hours passed before his reply, yes. He developed jaundice the day after birth. Our midwife sent us to Ohio Regional's NICU on the 16th. He stayed overnight for treatment with the Billy Lights. But he was never out of our sight except for brief medical procedures. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Connor hadn't been switched with another baby, he had been switched with a blood sample. Somehow, during his brief stay in the NICU, his blood work had been mixed up with another newborn's. The hospital had the wrong genetic information on file, but that still didn't explain how he was genetically my son. Unless, I messaged again. Mr. Mitchell, I know this is deeply personal, but did you and your wife use any reproductive assistance when conceiving Connor? Specifically, did you use donor eggs or IVF? This time, the response took more than a day. When it finally came, it was longer and more measured than his previous messages. Mrs. Parker, after discussing this with my wife, we've decided to be transparent with you. Yes, we used IVF with an anonymous egg donor. Connor is biologically my son but not my wife's. We've never hidden this from him, he's known his origin story since he was old enough to understand. What we don't understand is how you could possibly be showing as his biological mother. The donor process is supposed to be anonymous. Stared at the message, my hands trembling as the truth slowly crystallized. I had never donated eggs. I had never been through an IVF process. But there was one period in my life that I'd nearly forgotten. During my final year of physical therapy school, just before meeting Mark, I had been desperate for money to cover tuition. A classmate had mentioned that egg donation paid well. I had gone through the initial screening and been accepted, but ultimately changed my mind at the last minute, or so I thought. I'd signed the paperwork backing out of the process and walked away, or had I? The timeline matched perfectly. If my eggs had somehow been used despite my withdrawal, Connor could indeed be my biological child, just not one I had ever carried or given birth to. I typed a reply with shaking hands. Mr. Mitchell, this might sound incredible, but I donated eggs to a fertility clinic in Columbus around 2008. I withdrew from the process before extraction, or so I believed, but it seems possible my eggs were used for your IVF process anyway. This would explain our genetic connection without any hospital mix-up involving Connor directly. The implications were staggering. If Connor was biologically my child through an unauthorized egg donation, then the hospital switch must have involved Jacob and someone else entirely, likely the Chen's baby, Ethan, who showed as Mark's biological son. David Mitchell's next message confirmed my suspicions. We worked with Midwest Fertility Partners in 2008. Our donor was anonymous, #C247. We were told she was a graduate student in healthcare, 22 years old. This matches your profile at the time, I assume? If what you're suggesting is true, there may have been serious ethical violations at the fertility clinic. Had been donor candidate C247. But I had withdrawn before the procedure, or at least, that's what the paperwork I'd signed had indicated. Had the clinic proceeded anyway? Had they stolen my genetic material without my knowledge or consent? Before I could process this new revelation, another message appeared in my Ancestry link inbox, this one from an Chen associated with Ethan Chen's profile. Ms. Parker, my husband and I received a notification about a potential parental match between your husband and our son. We're confused and concerned. Could you please explain what this is about? Now we had two separate threads to the mystery, my biological connection to Connor through what appeared to be unauthorized use of my eggs, and Mark's biological connection to Ethan Chen. But where did Jacob fit into all this? The answer came a week later, after exchanging multiple messages with both families. The Chens agreed to a phone call, during which Mei Chen revealed something stunning. We adopted Ethan as a newborn, she explained, her voice tentative. His birth mother was a patient of my husband's, a teenager who couldn't care for a baby. The adoption was arranged privately through a lawyer, but processed through Ohio Regional because Daniel worked there. Ethan was born on April 16, but we listed the official date as the 17th when we took custody. So Ethan's birth mother was a patient of your husband's? I asked, struggling to make sense of it all. Yes. Amanda Wilson. She was only 16 when she got pregnant. Wilson. The same last name as one of the other families who had delivered a baby boy on April 17. Had Robert and Jennifer Wilson's son Aiden been switched with Jacob after more discussions and eventually, carefully arranged DNA tests, the full story emerged like a nightmare jigsaw puzzle finally completed. Amanda Wilson, the teenage niece of Robert Wilson, had become pregnant at 16. The father was Mark, my husband, who had a brief relationship with her before meeting me. Neither of them knew about the pregnancy until after we were already dating seriously. Amanda had approached Mark privately and agreed to give the baby up for adoption with his financial support. The Chens, with Daniel Chen working at the hospital, arranged to adopt the baby through a private attorney. Meanwhile, across town, my eggs had been harvested and used without my knowledge after I'd withdrawn from the donor program. They were fertilized with David Mitchell's sperm, resulting in Connor's birth through his wife as the gestational carrier. As for Jacob, our Jacob, DNA testing showed that he was the biological son of Robert and Jennifer Wilson, whose own son Aiden turned out to be the biological child of Miguel and Sofia Rodriguez. The storm and power outage on April 17, 2009, had created the perfect conditions for an unprecedented series of mistakes. In the chaos, at least 3 babies had been switched. The Wilsons took home the Rodriguez baby, Aiden. The Rodriguez family took home a baby whose origins we still couldn't determine. And Mark and I took home the Wilson baby, Jacob. All the while, Mark's biological son with Amanda Wilson had been adopted by the Chens and named Ethan, and my biological son from stolen eggs had been born to the Mitchells and named Connor. 5 families. 5 children. 1 hospital. Countless lives forever altered. When we finally sat Jacob down to explain what we discovered, I expected anger, confusion, perhaps even rejection. Instead, he listened quietly, his artist's eyes taking in every detail, every emotion playing across our faces. So biologically, I'm related to the Wilsons, he said finally, his voice steady. But you're still my parents. Always, I promised, tears streaming down my face. Nothing will ever change that. But there are other kids out there? Other families? He asked. Yes, Mark admitted. And we need to figure out what to do about that. I want to meet them, Jacob said immediately. All of them. They're part of my story now. The first meeting was awkward, tense, filled with tears and accusations. The Wilsons were devastated to learn that Jacob was biologically theirs, yet had been raised by others. The Rodriguez family was still struggling to process that Aiden wasn't their child. The Chens were defensive about their adoption of Ethan, insisting they had followed all legal procedures. And the Mitchells were planning to sue the fertility clinic for using my eggs without consent. Lawsuits were filed. The hospital faced multiple investigations. The fertility clinic's records were subpoenaed. Amanda Wilson, now a 31-year-old woman with a family of her own, was forced to confront the past she'd tried to leave behind, but amid the legal battles and emotional turmoil, something unexpected happened. The 5 families, bound by circumstance and genetics, began to form connections. The teenagers, Jacob, Aiden, Lucas, Ethan, and Connor, found in each other the missing pieces of their identities. They shared not just DNA but experiences, interests, and the unique perspective of children whose origins had been scrambled by fate and human error. Mark and I had to confront difficult truths about our marriage, his hidden past with Amanda, my resentment of his years of emotional distance from Jacob. The Wilsons had to decide whether to pursue custody of Jacob, ultimately choosing instead to build a relationship with him that respected the bonds he'd formed with us. The Rodriguez family discovered that Lucas, the boy they'd raised, was not connected to any of the other families, suggesting yet another switch we hadn't uncovered. 2 years after Mark's casual statement about a DNA test shattered our world, we've created a new normal. Our extended, unconventional family now includes 5 sets of parents and 5 teenagers who share holidays, celebrate milestones together, and navigate the complex emotions of their unusual circumstances. Jacob still lives with us, though he now spends 1 weekend a month with the Wilsons. Ethan visits Mark regularly, eager to know the father he never knew he had. Connor and I have developed a relationship that's not quite mother-son but more than friendship, bonded by genetics but not by shared history. Mark and I remain married, our relationship altered but not destroyed by the revelations. The truth nearly broke us, but ultimately brought a deeper understanding. His distance from Jacob hadn't been paranoia or delusion, some part of him had sensed the missing connection. And my fierce defense of our family wasn't naivete but the truest expression of what parenthood really means. Dr. Winters was right, parenthood is about more than genetics. The children we raised became ours in all the ways that matter most. But the children we didn't raise, the ones connected to us by blood but raised by others, have also become part of our story, our family, our hearts. Sometimes, late at night, I still find myself staring at family photos, tracing features and similarities between faces. Not to find differences, but to celebrate connections, both the ones written in DNA and the ones we've chosen to create, the children we raised. The children we lost. The family we built. The truth that changed everything.
If this story resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever discovered something that fundamentally changed how you viewed your family? I'd love to hear your experiences. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this touched you. More stories based on real dramas ahead, with strong morals, unexpected twists, and deep reflections on life. I never thought I'd become the office hero by essentially committing corporate sabotage, but sometimes life takes you down unexpected paths. Especially when those paths involve an egomaniacal boss, an ill-timed coffee spill, and the company's most important client presentation of the year. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Alex Reynolds, and until 6 months ago, I was just another mid-level marketing analyst at Meridian Innovations, a tech firm in Austin that specializes in AI solutions for retail businesses. Not exactly the stuff of Hollywood blockbusters, I know, but it paid the bills and occasionally offered free pizza on Fridays. The kind of job where you can wear jeans most days, bring your dog to work on Wednesdays, and pretend the ping pong table in the break room somehow makes up for working until 9 p.m. during launch weeks. My life was perfectly, gloriously average. I had a decent apartment with a balcony overlooking a parking lot, a succulent collection that was only partially dying, and a Netflix queue full of shows I'd get around to watching someday. I dated occasionally, had a small but solid group of friends, and called my parents just often enough to avoid the "Are you still alive?" text. In other words, I was living the quintessential millennial dream, treading water financially while trying to convince myself that my job was making some kind of difference in the world. Then came Madison Chun. Madison was hired as our new VP of marketing 6 months ago, swooping in from some Silicon Valley startup with promises of disruption and paradigm shifts and other buzzwords that should have immediately set off alarm bells. She was 35, impeccably dressed in that tech executive way, expensive minimalist outfits that somehow never wrinkled, and possessed the kind of confidence that made people either want to follow her off a cliff or push her off one. That I fell into the latter category from day one. Team, I've reviewed our marketing strategy for the past 2 years, and frankly, I'm underwhelmed, she announced in her first all-hands meeting. We've been playing it safe, thinking small. That ends today. She proceeded to outline her vision, which basically involved scrapping everything we'd been working on and starting from scratch, with half the budget and impossible deadlines. When one brave soul raised his hand to ask about the feasibility of the timeline, Madison smiled the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. I believe in setting ambitious goals. If you don't think you can meet them, perhaps Meridian isn't the right fit for you. And just like that, the tone was set. Madison Chun was not here to make friends. She was here to make waves, build her resume, and probably use Meridian as a stepping stone to a C-suite position somewhere bigger. The fact that she might crush a few souls along the way was merely collateral damage. Over the next few months, our once collaborative office culture transformed into something resembling a dystopian corporate nightmare. People started arriving earlier, leaving later, and looking progressively more exhausted. The once lively Slack channels fell silent except for work-related communications. Even the office dogs seemed depressed on Wednesdays. But Madison saved her special brand of micromanagement and criticism for me in particular. Maybe she sensed that I saw through her act from the beginning. Maybe she didn't like the way I questioned her more outlandish ideas in meetings, always respectfully, but still. Or maybe I was just the unfortunate person she'd decided to make an example of. Whatever the reason, my life became a special kind of hell. Every report I submitted came back covered in digital red ink. Every idea I proposed in meetings was immediately shot down. She accidentally left me off important email chains, then reprimanded me for not being prepared. Classic bullying tactics, but done with just enough plausible deniability that HR would never take action. "Alex, do you have a minute?" became the 5 words I dreaded most in the English language. Those minutes would inevitably turn into hour-long sessions where Madison would pick apart my work, my communication style, even my body language in meetings. "You need to lean in more," she'd say, apparently unaware of the irony of using feminist terminology while systematically undermining another professional. My coworkers noticed, of course, but most were too concerned with their own survival to intervene. A few offered sympathetic glances or after-work drinks where I could vent, but the general consensus was keep your head down and this too shall pass. The final straw came 3 months ago, when our team landed an opportunity to pitch to LuxTech, a potential client worth potentially $30 million in annual business. This would be the biggest account in Meridian's history, a genuine game changer. The entire marketing department was buzzing with excitement and anxiety. I'd been researching LuxTech for months, even before Madison arrived. They were exactly the kind of forward-thinking retail technology company that would benefit from our solutions, and I'd developed a comprehensive strategy for approaching them. When the RFP came in, I stayed late for a week preparing what I thought was an innovative, tailored pitch that addressed their specific pain points. The morning I was set to present my ideas to the internal team, Madison walked into the conference room, glanced at my carefully prepared slides and said, "Oh, I've already developed the pitch strategy. But thanks for your effort." She proceeded to present her own approach, which, to my complete disbelief, was almost identical to mine. The same key insights, the same strategic recommendations, even some of the same phrasing. The only difference was that now it had Madison Chen's name on it. She had stolen my work. Completely, blatantly stolen it. I sat there in stunned silence as my colleagues nodded along, complimenting her innovative thinking and strategic vision. When Ryan from the creative team caught my eye and raised an eyebrow, I just gave a small shake of my head. What could I say? It would be my word against hers, and everyone knew who the company valued more. After the meeting, Madison caught me by the arm as I was leaving. "Alex, I need you to take lead on preparing the deck for the LuxTech presentation, since you're familiar with the direction we're going." She smiled that non-smile again. "I'll need a draft by tomorrow morning." "But that's my mom's birthday dinner tonight," I said. "I've had it planned for weeks. I already mentioned I'd be leaving early today." Madison's expression didn't change. "Well, we all have to make sacrifices sometimes. This account is priority number 1 for the entire company right now." I swallowed my anger. "Fine. I'll reschedule dinner." "Perfect. And make sure the slides really pop. Okay? The executive team will be watching this presentation closely." I called my mom and made up a work emergency, promising to make it up to her that weekend. She was understanding, as always, which somehow made me feel even worse. Then I stayed at the office until midnight, creating a presentation that would make Madison look good using my ideas. The next morning, I handed over the completed deck. Madison glanced through it quickly and frowned. "This isn't quite what I had in mind. The language is too technical and the design is basic. I need you to redo it. The presentation is in 2 days," I pointed out. "And the language matches what LuxTech uses in their own materials." "I'm aware of the timeline, Alex, and I'm telling you this doesn't meet our standards. Are you refusing to make the requested changes?" I took a deep breath. "No. I'll revise it." "Good. I need the new version by end of day." Another late night, another missed personal commitment. This time it was my friend's gallery opening that I'd promised to attend. By the time I finished the revised deck, which was substantially the same as the first version but with more buzzwords and flashier transitions, I was running on caffeine, rage, and very little else. When I submitted the new version, Madison barely glanced at it before saying, "This will have to do, I suppose. By the way, I need you to prepare handouts for the presentation. 30 copies, professionally bound. We need them by tomorrow at 2 p.m. for the client meeting." Tomorrow? But that's a tight timeline, yes. But that's the reality of high-stakes business, Alex. If you can't handle it, I can handle it, I interrupted, surprising us both with my sharpness. Madison raised an eyebrow. "Good. And since you're so invested in this presentation, you might as well attend. Be at the conference center tomorrow at 2 p.m. Business formal attire, please." After she walked away, I sat at my desk, vibrating with a toxic mix of exhaustion and rage. This woman had stolen my work, forced me to miss important personal events, belittled me at every turn, and now was expectedly treating me like her personal assistant. And yet, in some twisted way, I was still expected to feel grateful for being included in the presentation. That night, as I waited at the 24-hour print shop for the handouts, I had a lot of time to think. About workplace dynamics and power imbalances. About credit stealing and bullying. About what I was willing to tolerate and what I wasn't. By the time I picked up the perfectly bound presentations the next morning, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to quit. That would be giving Madison exactly what she wanted. I wasn't going to report her to HR. They had already demonstrated their unwillingness to address the issue. And I wasn't going to confront her directly. That would be career suicide. No, I was going to play the long game. I was going to document everything, build my case methodically, and when the time was right, well, I didn't know exactly what I would do when the time was right, but it felt good to have some kind of plan beyond endure and survive. The day of the LuxTech presentation arrived. I dressed in my best suit, which admittedly had seen better days, gathered the handouts, and arrived at the downtown conference center 30 minutes early as instructed. The presentation was taking place in one of those sleek, modern meeting rooms with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, the kind of space designed to impress potential clients with how serious and successful you are. Madison was already there, of course, looking immaculate in a charcoal gray power suit and heels that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was arranging the handouts just so, angling the water pitchers for optimal accessibility, and generally micromanaging every possible detail. "Alex, finally," she said when she spotted me, as if I were late instead of early. "I need you to test the projector connection with my laptop. And make sure the lighting is right. I don't want any glare on the screen." I nodded and moved to the tech setup at the front of the room. As I was connecting cables and adjusting settings, the rest of our team began to file in: Ryan from creative, Priya from product, James from finance, and a few others. Then came our CEO, Thomas, and several other members of the executive team. Finally, the LuxTech contingent arrived, 5 people in total, led by their chief innovation officer, a woman named Elaine Woodward who had a reputation for being brilliant but demanding. Everyone exchanged handshakes and business cards, engaged in the obligatory small talk about traffic and weather, then took their seats around the massive conference table. I positioned myself in a chair against the wall, out of the main sight line but with a clear view of both the presentation screen and the participants. Madison took her place at the head of the table, confident and commanding as she began her introduction. "Thank you all for being here today. We at Meridian Innovations are thrilled about the potential partnership with LuxTech, and I'm excited to share our vision for how we can revolutionize your customer experience through our AI solutions." She launched into the presentation, clicking through the slides I had created while expertly delivering the pitch I had conceptualized. I had to admit she was good, polished, articulate, with just the right balance of technical knowledge and charismatic delivery. If I hadn't known that every idea she was presenting had been stolen from me, I might have been impressed. The LuxTech team seemed engaged, nodding along and occasionally making notes. Thomas, our CEO, was practically beaming as he watched Madison work her magic. Everything was going perfectly according to plan. Until it wasn't. About halfway through the presentation, Madison clicked to transition to the next slide, a crucial one that outlined our proposed implementation timeline, and nothing happened. She clicked again. Still nothing. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face as she tried once more. "Technical difficulties," she said with a forced laugh. "If you'll just give me a moment." I should have gotten up to help. That would have been the professional thing to do. Instead, I stayed seated, watching as Madison became increasingly flustered trying to troubleshoot. After what felt like an excruciatingly long minute, she looked up at me. "Alex, a little assistance, please." I rose and approached the laptop. "Let me take a look," I said, bending over to examine the computer. As I reached for the keyboard, my elbow accidentally bumped against Madison's coffee cup, the one she'd explicitly placed on the table despite my warning about keeping liquids away from the electronics. Time seemed to slow down as the cup tipped over, its contents spreading in a caffeinated wave across the keyboard of Madison's MacBook Pro. The screen flickered, glitched, and then went black. "Oh my God," Madison gasped, jumping back to avoid the coffee splashing onto her suit. "What did you just do?" "I'm so sorry," I said, grabbing napkins from the refreshment table and ineffectually dabbing at the keyboard. "It was an accident." The room had gone silent. Everyone was staring at the disaster unfolding before them. Not just the ruined laptop, but the derailed multi-million-dollar presentation. "Does anyone have a backup of the presentation?" Thomas asked, his voice tight with barely contained panic. Madison's face had gone pale. I knew exactly what she was thinking. She hadn't bothered to save the presentation anywhere but her laptop. Why would she? She was always in control, always prepared. Except for now. "I might be able to help," I said quietly. All eyes turned to me. "I have a copy on my drive," I continued. "I always keep backups of important projects." The relief on Thomas's face was immediate and profound. "Thank God. Can you access it now?" I nodded, pulling out my own laptop from my bag. "I can have it up in just a minute." As I connected my computer to the projector and pulled up the presentation, I could feel Madison's eyes boring into me. If looks could kill, I'd have been vaporized on the spot. But she couldn't say anything. Not without looking even more unprofessional in front of the clients and our CEO. "While Alex gets that set up," Madison said through gritted teeth, "perhaps I can take some questions about what we've covered so far." But Elaine Woodward from LuxTech raised her hand. Actually, if it's all the same to you, I'd like to hear the rest of the presentation from Alex, since it seems they're quite familiar with the material. Madison froze. Oh, well, Alex is part of my team, but I'm actually the lead on this project and I'm sure you are, Elaine interrupted smoothly. But I've found that sometimes the people closest to the work have the most valuable insights. And since we're already dealing with an unexpected situation, why not embrace it? Thomas, ever attuned to the wishes of potential big clients, quickly nodded. Excellent suggestion. Alex is extremely knowledgeable about this proposal. Madison, you won't mind if Alex takes us through the rest of the presentation, will you? It wasn't really a question. Madison's smile was so brittle it looked like her face might crack. Of course not. Alex, please proceed. And so I did. I stood at the front of that gleaming conference room, with the Austin skyline behind me and every important person in my professional life in front of me, and I delivered the presentation of my career. Not Madison's stolen version, but my original vision, the one I'd developed before she ever set foot in our office. I knew this material inside and out because it was mine. I spoke with genuine passion about the solutions I had researched and developed. I answered questions thoughtfully and with specific technical details that Madison would never have known. And throughout it all, I maintained the perfect balance of professional confidence and collaborative humility. By the end, Elaine Woodward was leaning forward in her seat, fully engaged. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we were hoping to find, she said when I concluded. I particularly appreciate how your approach addresses our inventory forecasting challenges. That's something none of the other firms we've spoken with have tackled effectively. Thomas was positively glowing with pride, as if he'd discovered me himself. Alex has been a key player in our marketing strategy development, he said, conveniently forgetting how he'd ignored me in every executive meeting for the past 6 months. Madison sat rigid in her chair, her coffee-stained notebook in front of her, saying nothing. What could she say? The presentation had been saved. The client was impressed. Any complaint would look like petty jealousy. As the meeting concluded and everyone began to disperse, Elaine approached me directly. I'd like to continue this conversation, she said, handing me her business card. Call my office tomorrow to set up a follow-up meeting. I have some specific questions about implementation that I'd like to discuss with you personally. I accepted the card, aware that Madison was watching this exchange with barely concealed fury. I'd be happy to, I replied. Thank you for the opportunity. After the LuxTech team departed, Thomas clapped me on the shoulder. Outstanding work, Alex. Truly outstanding. We'll need to talk about your role going forward. Clearly, you've got talents we haven't been fully utilizing. Madison chose that moment to interject. Yes, Alex certainly surprised us all today. Her tone suggested this wasn't entirely a compliment. Thomas, when you have a moment, I'd like to discuss some concerns about team dynamics. Thomas nodded distractedly, already turning back to me. Let's have lunch tomorrow, Alex. My assistant will set it up. As the room cleared out, Madison and I were left alone. The silence between us was electric with tension. That was quite a performance, she finally said, her voice low. I suppose you think you're very clever. I met her gaze steadily. It was my work, Madison. All of it. The research, the strategy, the deck. All mine. It was a team effort under my direction, she countered automatically. But there was no conviction behind it. We both know that's not true. Just like we both know that spilled coffee was no accident. Her eyes widened slightly at my admission. You deliberately sabotaged a client presentation? Do you have any idea how unprofessional and potentially damaging that was? If I tell Thomas, what will you tell him exactly? I interrupted. That you stole my work and presented it as your own? That you've been systematically undermining me for months? That you have no actual backup systems in place for critical client materials? She took a step toward me, voice dropping to a near whisper. This isn't over, Alex. Not by a long shot. I smiled, feeling strangely calm. Actually, I think it is. But I appreciate the heads up that I should start documenting our conversations more carefully. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Madison? You might want to dry out your laptop. Rice sometimes helps with liquid damage." The next 48 hours were a whirlwind. My lunch with Thomas turned into a detailed discussion of my vision for the department and ended with a promotion offer: Senior Director of Strategic Marketing, reporting directly to him rather than Madison. My follow-up call with Elaine Woodward resulted in an invitation to LuxTech's headquarters to discuss our proposal further, an invitation extended specifically to me, not Madison. And then there was Madison herself, who seemed to be executing a scorched earth policy in her final days at Meridian. Yes, final days. Turns out that when your entire professional value proposition is built on stolen ideas and intimidation tactics, things fall apart pretty quickly once that facade cracks. The official story was that Madison had decided to pursue other opportunities, corporate speak for quit before she could be fired. The unofficial story, which spread through office gossip channels faster than a viral TikTok, was much juicier. Apparently, after our confrontation, Madison had stormed into Thomas's office to demand my termination for sabotage and insubordination. Unfortunately for her, she made this demand in front of our VP of People Operations, who had been in Thomas's office discussing an unrelated matter. When pressed for details about my alleged misconduct, Madison's explanation grew increasingly convoluted and defensive. This prompted Thomas to initiate a review of our team's work over the past 6 months. Emails were examined, project files were timestamped, colleagues were interviewed, and a pattern emerged that couldn't be ignored. Madison had been systematically claiming credit for her team's work, particularly mine, while creating a hostile work environment that was driving top talent toward the exits. The final nail in her professional coffin came when Priya from product development revealed that Madison had pressured her to falsify certain metrics in our LuxTech proposal, metrics that I had corrected in my version of the presentation. If LuxTech had moved forward based on Madison's inflated numbers, we could have faced serious legal and financial consequences. Madison was given the option to resign immediately or face termination with cause. She chose the former, but not before sending a company-wide email accusing me of orchestrating a calculated campaign to undermine her leadership and warning that Meridian would regret choosing mediocrity over excellence. The email was deleted from the server within an hour, but not before everyone had read, screenshot, and thoroughly enjoyed it. By the time I arrived at work the morning after Madison's departure, her office had been cleared out, her name removed from the company directory, and her corporate headshot taken down from the leadership section of our website. It was as if she had never existed on my new office. Yes, I got her old one, complete with the corner windows and actually functional ergonomic chair, was filled with congratulatory messages, plants, and an assortment of coffee cups with notes saying things like, "Spill me if you must," and "Career Advancement Juice." My team's dark humor was apparently intact despite months of Madison's reign of terror. At AS, I settled into my new role. I discovered something surprising. I was actually good at it. Really good. Without Madison's constant criticism and undermining, my confidence returned. Ideas flowed more freely. I built a collaborative team culture where credit was shared and midnight work sessions were the exception rather than the rule. We landed the LuxTech account, followed by 2 other major clients who had heard about our innovative approach. 6 months after the coffee incident, Meridian's marketing department was thriving. We'd been featured in industry publications, our campaign metrics were the best in company history, and employee satisfaction scores had skyrocketed. Thomas had taken to introducing me as the future of our company in executive meetings. And Madison? Last I heard, she was consulting, which everyone knows is what you do when no one will hire you. Her LinkedIn profile described her as a transformational leader specializing in disruptive marketing strategies, which I suppose is one way to characterize what happened. I sometimes wonder if I should feel guilty about that spilled coffee. It was, technically speaking, sabotage, a deliberate act designed to create a crisis that I knew I could solve better than Madison could. Was it ethical? Probably not. Was it justified after months of her stealing my work and crushing my professional spirit? I like to think so. The truth is, in the corporate world, sometimes you have to create your own opportunities. Sometimes you have to force people to see your value. And sometimes you have to be willing to spill a little coffee to put out a much bigger fire. That I keep a small potted plant on my desk now, the only surviving member of my once thriving succulent collection. It's called a watch chain succulent, known for its resilience and ability to thrive under harsh conditions. Every morning when I water it, I'm reminded that sometimes the things that try to bury you are actually helping you grow. And I did eventually make it up to my mom for missing her birthday dinner. I flew her to Austin for a weekend of pampering, complete with a 5-star dinner where I didn't once check my work email. As we clinked glasses, she said, "To my brilliant child, who finally learned that sometimes you have to break the rules to fix the game. Mothers always know, don't they?" Thank you for listening to my story today. If it resonated with you in any way, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to reassess your relationship with family members? Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we share with each other. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about family dynamics, personal growth, and the complicated beauty of human relationships. Knew her death, the family turned to Heather with a relation and the life I'd spent 10 years building. All because my older sister Melissa, Dad's undisputed favorite, said she couldn't handle it alone anymore. What a crock of shit that turned out to be. When I arrived at the colonial-style house where we grew up, with its fading blue paint and sagging porch steps, Dad barely recognized me. The aggressive chemo treatments had clouded his once sharp mind, leaving him confused and vulnerable. Melissa greeted me with a performance worthy of an Oscar. Exhausted caregiver, dutiful daughter, selfless martyr. She hugged me tightly, whispering, "Thank God you're here." I don't know what I would have done. I believed her. That was my first mistake. The dynamic in our family had always been painfully clear. Melissa was the golden child who could do no wrong, and I was the perpetual disappointment. Dad had never hidden his preference. When Melissa got straight A's, she received lavish gifts. When I got straight A's, Dad would nod and say, "Finally living up to your potential." When Melissa decided to stay local for college to be close to family, Dad praised her loyalty. When I left for the West Coast, he called it running away from responsibility. Still, he was my father. And despite everything, I loved him. So I put my life on hold and came home to help. For the first few weeks, Melissa seemed genuinely relieved to have me there. We established a routine. I handled mornings and afternoons with Dad, while she took evenings and overnight, claiming it worked better with her job as a real estate agent. She could show houses during the day, she explained, while I worked remotely from home as a software developer. "It's perfect timing," she said one evening over grocery store sushi in the kitchen. "Dad's financial advisor says there's plenty in his accounts to cover the in-home care and medications. We just need to provide the emotional support." I nodded, grateful that money wasn't going to be an additional stress. Dad had always been prudent with his finances after building a successful construction business. He'd retired 5 years earlier, selling the company to his longtime foreman and setting himself up comfortably for retirement. Before the cancer diagnosis changed everything. It wasn't until the 3rd month that I began noticing discrepancies. First, it was the missed medication deliveries. The pharmacy claimed the payment method had been declined. Then the home health aide mentioned she hadn't been paid for the previous 2 weeks. When I asked Melissa about it, she waved it off. "Just administrative errors," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I'll handle it." She did temporarily. But then the mortgage statement arrived, showing the house was 2 months behind on payments. The house that had been paid off for over a decade. Dad must have taken out a reverse mortgage, Melissa explained when I confronted her. For medical expenses. He did it last year before things got bad. Something felt off about her explanation, but I didn't have proof to challenge it. Dad was having more and more bad days, where his confusion made meaningful conversations impossible. On his rare good days, he seemed hesitant to discuss finances, changing the subject whenever I brought it up. Then came the phone calls from collection agencies asking for James Richardson, my father's name. Credit cards I didn't know existed. Loans from banks across 3 different states. "I'll take care of it," Melissa kept saying, snatching the phone away whenever these calls came in. Dad gave me power of attorney for a reason. That was news to me. "When did that happen?" I asked. "Last year," she said. "When he first got sick. He knew I'd make the right decisions." The condescension in her tone was unmistakable. The implication clear. Dad trusted her, not me. Still, I might have continued believing her if not for Mr. Abernathy, Dad's next-door neighbor of 20 years. He caught me alone one afternoon while I was checking the mail. "Alex," he said, leaning over the fence that separated our properties. "Got a minute? There's something you should know." Mr. Abernathy had retired from banking. He and Dad used to golf together every Sunday before the cancer. "Your sister's got a new Mercedes," he said without preamble. "Drove by it last week at the mall. Custom plates and everything. Lisa one. Pretty fancy for someone who was complaining about commission checks being down at the neighborhood barbecue last summer." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October breeze. "Maybe she got a good deal," I said weakly. Mr. Abernathy's expression darkened. "And the 3 vacations this year? The renovation on her condo? That designer handbag collection her daughter keeps bragging about on that Instagram thing?" My stomach nodded. "I didn't know about any of that. Your father and I talk," he said. "Or we used to before he got so sick. He mentioned helping her with a down payment on a vacation property in Vermont last winter. Said he was happy to do it, but it was stretching him thin. That night, while Melissa was supposedly at a showing, I did something I never thought I would do. I searched her room, the guest room she'd been using when she stayed overnight with Dad. There, in the bottom drawer of the desk, hidden beneath real estate brochures, I found them: bank statements, credit card applications, transfer receipts, all in my father's name, all with signatures that looked close to his, but not quite right. Systematic, calculated theft. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. I photographed everything with shaking hands, then carefully returned the documents exactly as I'd found them. I needed time to think, to plan my next move. Confronting Melissa immediately felt dangerous. She'd always been the type to attack when cornered. Instead, I called Dad's longtime attorney the next day, explaining my suspicions. He sounded grave but not entirely surprised. "I've been trying to reach your father for months about some irregular activity," he said. "Your sister always intercepts my calls. Says he's too ill to discuss business. We arranged to meet the following week when he returned from a conference. Don't confront her yet," he warned. "If what you're saying is true, this is elder financial abuse. It's a serious crime." I agreed to wait, but the knowledge ate at me. Every fake smile Melissa gave me, every time she generously offered to pick up Dad's prescriptions or handle a bill, I saw through the performance to the fraud beneath. Then came the night everything imploded. I was working late in the living room when I heard Dad calling from his bedroom. When I entered, he was more lucid than he'd been in weeks, sitting up in bed with an intensity in his eyes I hadn't seen since before the illness. "Alex," he said urgently, "I need to tell you something about the money." My heart raced. "What about it, Dad?" "It's not what you—" he began, but was cut off by a fit of coughing. And then Melissa was there, appearing in the doorway as if she'd been listening. "Dad, you should be sleeping," she said, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes hard as flint. "Alex, I'll take it from here. You look exhausted." "No," Dad insisted between coughs. "Need to tell about the accounts?" Melissa moved swiftly to his bedside, administering his pain medication with practiced efficiency. "Should, Dad, you're confused again. Remember what the doctor said about agitation?" Alex was just leaving. Her glare could have cut glass. Reluctantly, I backed out of the room, but I didn't go far. Instead, I stood in the hallway, listening as she murmured soothingly to our father until his voice faded and the medication pulled him under. When she emerged, shutting his door quietly, her mask dropped. "What did you say to him?" she hissed. "Nothing," I replied honestly. "He called for me." Well, stay out of things you don't understand, she snapped. I'm the one with power of attorney. I'm the one who's been here from the beginning, not showing up halfway through when it was convenient. The injustice of her statement stung. I came as soon as you asked for help. Her laugh was bitter. After 10 years of barely visiting? Please, Dad knows who really cares about him. Before I could respond, her phone rang. She checked the screen and her expression changed instantly. I have to take this. It's a client. We'll finish this conversation later. She disappeared downstairs, her voice switching to professional charm. As she answered the call, I returned to the living room, mind racing. Dad had been trying to tell me something important about the money, and Melissa had deliberately stopped him. The next morning, I woke to shouting. Melissa's voice, shrill with what sounded like genuine panic. Calling my name, I rushed to Dad's room to find her standing over his bed, phone in hand, her face ashen. He's not breathing right, she said, her composure cracking. I've called 911. The next hours passed in a blur. The ambulance, the emergency room, the doctors with grave expressions. Pneumonia, they said, a common complication. His immune system too compromised to fight ITWY evening. He was gone and I sat in the hospital corridor, numb with shock and grief, while Melissa sobbed theatrically for the benefit of the sympathetic nurses. As soon as we were alone, however, her tears vanished. I'll handle the funeral arrangements, she said briskly, and we'll need to meet with Dad's attorney about the will. He left me as executor, of course. Of course. The funeral was 3 days later. A modest service, surprisingly modest, given Dad's standing in the community. Melissa explained it was what Dad wanted. Though I had my doubts. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following week. It was during those quiet, grief-filled days in the empty house that I made my second discovery. Searching for a copy of Dad's birth certificate in his home office, I found a hidden compartment in the back of his filing cabinet. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name written on it in Dad's handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened it to find a letter dated just 2 months earlier, during a period when his mind had still been relatively clear. Alex, if you're reading this, I'm likely gone. I need you to know the truth. I've made terrible mistakes with both my children, but especially with you. I favored your sister for reasons that now seem petty and foolish. I pushed you away, and for that, I'm deeply sorry. More urgently, if Melissa claims I gave her power of attorney, it's a lie. I've never signed such documents. I've suspected for months that money is disappearing, but my illness has made it difficult to investigate. My attorney Bradford Wells has copies of my true financial records. Most importantly, I've changed my will. Despite appearances, you and Melissa will share equally in what remains of my estate. Don't let her tell you otherwise. I wish we had time for me to make amends in person. Know that I was always proud of you, even when I failed to show it. Love. Dottie sat motionless, the letter clutched in my hands, as conflicting emotions washed over me. Grief for the relationship we'd never fully had. Validation that my suspicions about Melissa were correct. And a new, horrible realization. Dad hadn't merely been confused when trying to tell me about the accounts. He'd been trying to warn me. The reading of the will was set for Monday at 2 p.m. I arrived early at the attorney's office, Dad's letter securely in my pocket. To my surprise, Mr. Wells, the attorney, asked to speak with me privately before Melissa arrived. I received your father's amended will just 6 weeks ago, he said gravely, along with some concerning notes about unauthorized financial transactions. I've been conducting a quiet investigation since our phone call. He slid a folder across his desk. These are the preliminary findings. Multiple accounts drained. Fraudulent credit applications. Property transfers. All bearing signatures that our handwriting expert believes were forged. My throat tightened. So she took everything? Not everything, he replied, but close to $2 million over the past year. The number hit me like a physical blow. $2 million. All while she cried about being overwhelmed by Dad's care. There's something else, Mr. Wells continued. Something that only emerged yesterday when the bank provided additional records we'd subpoenaed. He pulled out another document, a loan application in my name. My signature, or rather, a forgery of it, authorizing a $500,000 loan against Dad's remaining assets. Dated 3 months ago, when I was already living in the house. She set me up, I whispered, understanding dawning. She knew she might get caught eventually, so she created evidence that I was stealing too. Mr. Wells nodded grimly. It appears so, but she made a critical mistake. The date on this application coincides with your business trip to Chicago for that conference. We can prove you were out of state when this was supposedly signed. My mind flashed back to the 3-day tech conference I'd attended. Melissa had insisted she could handle Dad alone for those days. You deserve a break, she'd said. Go reconnect with your industry contacts. It hadn't been generosity. It had been calculation. The office door opened, and the receptionist announced Melissa's arrival. As she strutted in, designer purse on her arm and not a trace of grief on her face, Mr. Wells gave me a questioning look. I nodded slightly. We'd discussed the options. I knew what had to happen. Melissa, Mr. Wells said formally, thank you for coming. Before we proceed with the reading of your father's will, there are some legal matters we need to address. Her smile faltered. What matters? Perhaps you'd like to explain these. He laid out the evidence of her theft piece by piece. The forged signatures, the fraudulent accounts, the property transfers, and finally, the fake loan in my name. I expected anger. Denials. Instead, Melissa's face contorted into something almost pitiful. A child caught in a lie too big to talk her way out of. You don't understand, she said, her voice small. Dad always gave me everything. When he got sick and started saying no, talking about being fair to you after all these years. It wasn't right. I deserved that money. I was always the one he loved. So you stole it, I said flatly, and tried to frame me for part of it. Her eyes hardened. You left for 10 years. You barely called. I was here, dealing with his moods, his expectations, while you got to be free. Then suddenly he's dying and it's Alex this, Alex that, and he's changing his will to give you half? After everything I did for him. Mr. Wells cleared his throat. Ms. Richardson, I've already contacted the authorities. The evidence of elder financial abuse and fraud is substantial. They'll be arriving shortly to take your statement. The color drained from her face. You can't be serious. It's a family matter. It's a criminal matter, he corrected. Your father specifically instructed me to pursue this if his suspicions proved correct. She turned to me, desperation replacing arrogance. Alex, please. We can work this out between us. I'll pay it back. Think about my kids. Your niece and nephew. The same niece and nephew she'd been showering with expensive gifts bought with stolen money. The same kids she'd taught to look down on their loser uncle who'd moved across the country. You tried to frame me, I repeated. While I was taking care of Dad. While I put my entire life on hold to be here. If those signatures hadn't been dated during my Chicago trip, I could have faced criminal charges. Her expression confirmed it hadn't been an accident. Dad asked me to come home because you told him you needed help, I continued, a terrible clarity washing over me. But that wasn't true, was it? You wanted me here as your scapegoat. Someone to blame when the money was discovered missing. She didn't deny it. Mr. Wells, I said quietly, I'd like to see the will now. As the attorney prepared to read the document, I thought about Dad's letter in my pocket. The belated apology. The acknowledgement of his favoritism. Too little, too late, and yet somehow enough to remind me that despite everything, he had been my father. Flawed, unfair, but in the end, trying in his limited way to make amends. When the police arrived 20 minutes later, Melissa was still sitting shell-shocked as the full consequences of her actions began to sink in. The will had indeed been changed, splitting the remaining estate, roughly worth $1.2 million after her theft, equally between us. But given the criminal charges she now faced, her portion would likely go toward restitution. As they led her away, she turned to me one last time. He loved me more. He always did. Remember that. I didn't argue. In a way, she was right. He had loved her more, and look where that unfair allocation of affection had led us all. Her to crime and disgrace. Him to betrayal by his golden child. And me to a bittersweet inheritance I would have traded in a heartbeat for a father who had simply valued both his children equally from the start. 6 months later, I'm back in Seattle. Dad's house has been sold, the medical bills settled, and Melissa is awaiting trial after pleading not guilty despite the overwhelming evidence. Her husband divorced her almost immediately, custody of their children now shared. My portion of the inheritance sits mostly untouched in investments. Sometimes I think about what Dad tried to tell me that night before Melissa interrupted. I'll never know exactly what he wanted to say. Whether he suspected the extent of her betrayal. Whether he truly understood the damage his lifetime of favoritism had caused. The hardest lesson in all of this wasn't discovering my sister's theft. It was realizing that the family dynamics we grew up with, the golden child and the scapegoat, had corrupted us both in different ways. Her sense of entitlement. My willingness to accept less than I deserved. In the end, nobody won. Not Dad, who died knowing one child had stolen from him and the other had been a stranger for years. Not Melissa, who lost everything chasing what she thought she was owed. And not me, left to pick up the pieces of a family that had been broken long before anyone got sick. If there's anything to be learned from our story, perhaps it's this: when parents plant seeds of inequality between siblings, they shouldn't be surprised at the bitter harvest that eventually grows. The golden child can tarnish. The underestimated one can rise. And sometimes, the family legacy isn't what's in the will, it's the wreckage left behind by years of unjust comparisons. The money is just money. The real inheritance was the damage. The end. If you liked the story, subscribe to our channel and share your impressions in the comments. We try to post new stories every day.